All right, good morning. Good morning. Thank you. So my name is Dr. Suzanne Smith. I'm the Provost Vice President for Academic Affairs here at GSW. And I'm happy to spend some time today with you talking about a project that I've been doing in partnership with some colleagues at Washington State University with their 4-H program. And that's the institution I was at prior to coming to here. And so this is a project that I helped start with them a number of years ago. So the project takes place in Burundi, Africa. So how many people have heard of Burundi before? Anybody? Okay, just a few. How many of you have heard of Rwanda before? Or know where? Okay. So Burundi and Rwanda are neighbors. How many of you know of Rwanda because of the movie Hotel Rwanda? Yeah. So that's true for most people. So Burundi and Rwanda are very similar in composition. They border each other, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. They both have the same tribal composition, the Hutu and the Tutsi and the Twa. For Burundi, the composition of Hutu is about 85%. For Tutsis, about 15%. And the Twa is a pygmy tribe, and it's less than 1% of their population. They're very nomadic, and I'm going to talk to you more about the Twa in a few minutes because I've actually spent a lot of my time working with the Twa while I've been in Burundi. So generally the first question is, why Burundi? How did you choose Burundi? And so the short version of that is that I had a colleague at Washington State University who was an extension, and her church did a mission trip to Burundi in 2012. And so she went over, they did some work at the THARS compound, which you're going to see some pictures of in just a second. And when she was there, being an educator, she's a family specialist, she wanted to go visit some schools. So the organization that we partner with, our NGO, has 12 schools that they work with. And so she went to all the different schools and said, what are your big issues? What are you having problems with? If we were going to be able to help you, what could we help you with? And all of the schools had the same answer. They said, our kids are hungry. We don't have a school feeding program. They don't have food at home. We have a lot of kids that don't come to school because they're scared that their families are eating while they're gone and that they're missing out, that they don't have food at night because their families are eating it when they're not there during the day. So they said, if we could figure out something to do about food, that would be really helpful for our kids. It's also true that the public education system didn't start in Burundi until a couple decades ago. So you have people teaching 8th grade who might have a 10th grade education in Burundi. And so they said, we would love some professional development on how to be a teacher, how to teach different subjects. So those are the kind of things that Mary Catherine heard when she was over there. She thought that was really interesting, and she wanted to try to figure out what to do about it. So she went back the next year with one of our colleagues, Kevin, who you'll see a picture of, and talked to the same teachers again and said, here's some ideas that we've had. Which of these sticks with you? Which do you think makes the most sense? And the one that stuck with them was the idea of doing school gardens. And so we've been doing a school gardening project over there for about 5 years now. I went over in 2014 for a couple weeks to do a test site. So I worked at one of the schools, and I worked with the THARS Center. I put some gardens in with some staff we did soil samples to see what we would need to do. And that's how this project got birthed. So what I thought I would do today is talk to you a little bit about Burundi in general first, and then at the end talk to you about our project specifically and what we're doing over there. So at the time that they started going to Burundi was the 8th poorest country in the world. According to statistics today, it's considered to be the 2nd poorest country in the world. So, and I'll show you some statistics about that in a minute, but that's another reason that we keep doing our work there. So as you can see, Burundi is landlocked. It's between the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, and Tanzania. I don't know if you can see Bujumbura on there. Right here. This is the capital city, and then most of my work takes place here in the Gitega region. And I'll show you some pictures of Gitega in just a second. So, Burundi in general. To kind of put this in comparison to something closer to home for you. So the state of Georgia has an area of about 59,000 square miles. The state of Burundi has about 10,000 square miles, so it's about a fifth the size, obviously, of the state of Georgia. However, the population in Burundi is larger than the population in the state of Georgia. So imagine we shrink Georgia down to 20% of its size, and then we increase the population of it. It's pretty crowded there. So that's one thing to think in mind. The other thing to consider is the average family income is $139 a day in the state of Georgia, and then the average family income in Burundi is about $1.25 a day. Cost of living is obviously cheaper there, but it means that most families, for many of these families, it's only $1.25 because you have enough people making money. You have many families there that have no income. So one of the things that I find fascinating is the age of the population in Burundi. And I will tell you that that Burundi has no tourism because they had a civil war that took place in 1965 to 1972. And during that time, they lost about 250,000 people. So it was an uprising against the government. The government won, and in the process, they killed a lot of people. So they had another civil war that happened from about 1993 to about 2004. What they discovered is the kids of the parents who caused the first civil war came together and had another uprising to try to carry out the work that their parents weren't able to carry out. And in that case, about 500,000 people were killed. So that's a lot of people. Even though their population is so large, that's a lot of people. What we've learned in the last 10, 15 years is that many of the people that were killed were the people that were in the 20s and 30s. And so we have a very large population of kids. So if you look at Burundi, for example, 46% of their population is 14 years of age or under. That's really astronomical. That means that that's a very large population of kids that potentially doesn't have parents around. So 19% are 15 to 24, 30% about are 25 to 54, and only 6% of their population is 55 years of age or older. If you compare that to the United States, 28% of our population is 55 years of age. So the median age in Burundi right now is about 17.6 or about 18, but the average life expectancy for a Burundian female is about 46, and the average life expectancy for a Burundian male is about 44. So dramatically different than what you would see here in the United States. And a lot of this is the result of people who have gone off to war when they had young kids and then they didn't make it back. You'll see pictures of different people that I've worked with. One of the guys that works with the THARS organization, his name is Charles. And Charles has actually come to the United States and stayed with my family before. And when I first met Charles, he's young, he's in his 40s. He said he had 7 kids. And I was like, okay, that's higher than the average family size in the United States, but not uncommon in Burundi. And that's all he said. Over the course of the next 2 weeks working with him side by side in these fields, I started asking questions about his kids. And he said, I'm trying to put 2 through college, and I've got, this kid is in 2nd grade. And I said, okay, so clearly I've misjudged how old you are, because I wouldn't have thought you'd be capable of a spread like this. And what he said was, oh, none of these children are biologically mine. These are all children of my sisters and brothers who were killed in the war, and they didn't have anywhere else to go. So now these are all my children. We're raising them. And I discovered over my time there that this is very common, that people are, because parents have been killed in the civil unrest, that they have other people taking care of their kids. But their family sense of family is so strong that they take those, they take them into their family willingly and happily. So, but that explains why you have such a large population that's under the age of 14 in Burundi right now. 70% live in poverty in Burundi. That's probably an underestimate. Whereas if you look at the United States, the U.S. statistic in 2018 was 12% of people in the United States live in poverty. Poverty rate in Georgia right now is about 15%. Coffee is the major export in Burundi. About 93% of all money coming into the country is by sending coffee out of the country. It's interesting though, because my first morning there, I asked for, it's early and the time difference. I was like, a cup of coffee would be great. And Charles was like, oh, we didn't even think about getting coffee for you. And I was like, well, I thought coffee was like your major export. And he said, oh, it is, but we can't afford it. So we don't actually drink the coffee because it all has to go somewhere else. And so I went to the store and bought a ton of coffee, and we all drank coffee for 3 weeks. It was awesome. So Gitega is where most of my work takes place. It's a city of about 100,000 people. It's in the rainforest in the mountain region of Burundi. It's at about 7,200 feet. So this is a picture of the city when you drive into it. So this is the big downtown area. This Leo building is a grocery store. That's where they do all of their marketing. And if you see all around it, all the bicycles. So how many cars do you see in this picture? I don't have my glasses on, but I don't think there's any, are there? In Burundi, only about 1% of the population has a car. Gas is extraordinarily expensive, and then you have to buy a car. They have a Burundian saying that I learned very quickly, that a car is never full. And what that means is if you have a car and you get in it, and Burundians see that you're about to drive somewhere, they start piling in. It's extraordinary how many people they can fit into a car, because number one, they think some of them have never been in a car before, and number two, they walk everywhere they go. So bikes are actually their main form of transportation, and many of these bikes are actually taxis. And so I'll tell you some stories from when I was there as I go along, as I have time. But so I took this picture my second day in Gitega. I'd come down here to go to they called it an internet cafe, but it's 3 computers, probably the first generation computer ever made, and they're all hooked up to electricity by a switchboard. And so if you tried to log on, it was the old, you guys are so young, you probably wouldn't have never have heard a computer that, would go da-ding, 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 trying to make something happen. And if it didn't work, they would just start switching wires until another computer came on. But I was going to this building to use the computer, get some groceries, and Charles said, okay, I'm gonna go swing around to this place over here and I'll come pick you up in an hour. I'm like, okay, that sounds good. After about 30 minutes, my frustration level was high with the computer situation, so I thought, I don't really have anything that important to do on the computer. I'm gonna go walk through the city. And when I walked out, there was no one out there. It was just kind of me, hanging out. I learned the words quickly for, they say white girl. And so this is a very, 100,000 people, it's considered rural for them. I heard people start talking about the fact that there's now a white girl around. So people start popping out of their buildings. And so I was like, okay, so they're curious, that's okay. And then I start seeing all these bikes pull up. And then I honestly started getting a little nervous, like, okay, so they've called like everyone they know, and now what am I supposed to do? I don't know the language. I couldn't walk back to where I'm staying if you paid me $1 million. I have no idea where I am. I don't know where Charles is. And they just came in by the dozens and dozens and dozens. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go back to the grocery store. So I walked back, to the internet center, which is over here. I walked back and kind of stood at the door for a minute. And then Charles drives up and he's like, oh, how did it go? And I was like, oh, it's fine, but it's like I started getting a little nervous. I'm not sure why all these people are showing up. He goes, well, because work is over and these are taxis and they're just waiting to take people home. I was like, oh, I thought they were here because of me. I thought they were, it's like I didn't know what they were doing. So that's kind of how they get around. So I thought I would run through just a couple things that are really important in Burundi. And the number one thing that you hear being important is family. Which is like most people in the world. The pictures that you see here are actually from the Twa village. So the place where I worked is at the bottom of a valley, and then on the top of the hill, there's a Twa village. The Twa were nomadic in nature for most of their existence. They made the living by making clay pots and then selling them, and then once they'd exhausted that area, they would move on to the next area. Unfortunately, when the economy started tanking, no one had any money to buy their clay pots. So they've actually been at this site for about 6 years, which the chief tells me is the longest that his tribe in their history has ever been anywhere. And so it's just because they don't see any need to move anywhere else because there's no one that can afford to buy what they have to sell. So they're trying to figure out this idea of staying in place. But this family here, the family on the left, lives in the place in the middle. So there's actually 2 other kids that you can't see here. So there's a family of 6 and 2 parents that live in the building in the middle. And their homes are typically made from clay, sticks, straw, whatever they can find, which, if they weren't staying there for more than a year, it didn't really matter. They rebuild their houses every rainy season, and in Gitega, in this region, there's 4 big rainy seasons. So you build your house, the rain washes it away, you wait for the rain to end, you build it back up, and you just do this over and over throughout the course of the year. But family is very important to them. They take care of their own. Kids typically take care of younger kids. The mom generally is in charge of the smaller kids, but you can see this little kid on the right. This is one of the many children that I wanted to bring home. Not uncommon to see really small kids carrying even smaller kids on their backs. That's just kind of what they do. So this is in the Twa village as well. So we asked them, if we were going to give you, $500, what would you use it for? What would be helpful for you? And the Twa village actually said that this is their community center. It's a 1-room building in the middle of their layout. And they said that they would like concrete for the floor because when the rains start, their building gets flooded and then they can't go in there anymore. But if they had concrete, that they could wash it out, they could sweep it out because it's not getting absorbed by the ground. So they said if they got a grant that they would use it to build a concrete floor. So that shows you the importance of community. So the number one thing that they build when they get to a new site is a place for people to gather. The second thing they build is individual homes for families. So sense of family is extremely important to them, but so is the sense of community as well. This is actually the Twa Village Community Center. But same would be true for the Hutu, Tutsis, for anyone else. Spirituality is also very important. They have, the majority of people in Burundi are Catholic. And so they tend to have church on Saturdays. This is at a church in downtown Gitega. And so people will walk 10, 15 miles to come to church on Saturday or on Sunday, depending on what days their church meets. And it's an all-day affair. You have a service, you do singing and dancing for a few hours, you have a meal together, you have another service, and then it usually ends with some kind of dancing or ceremony or celebration. So when you talk to them about their lives, they will almost always mention these 3 things in succession: the importance of community, spirituality, and family. Okay, so I talked a little bit about transportation as well. I found it fascinating. Like I said, anytime a car is going anywhere, you either have people jumping in the car or you have people holding on to the car. So this is just an example of people see a truck. You probably can't see in here, but there's like 15 people in the back of that truck as well. Not uncommon to see any kind of, even if it's like a little Volkswagen Bug, to see 5 or 6 people on a bike holding on to it to help them navigate through the city streets. I was fascinated by what they could carry on their heads. They could carry, so if you look at these baskets, so I learned how to say, can I hold your basket? Which I know, if you're going to learn anything, why would you learn can I hold your basket? Because I wanted to see how much weight they're carrying on their heads. Some of these things are so heavy that they have to have 2 people put it on their head for them, but then they don't even have to use their arms. So I kind of became fascinated with this. What they do have is a ring. They have different sizes based on the size of your head, but they make out of reeds a ring that you place on the top of your crown, and then the basket goes on top of the ring that's on the top of your head. So they gave me a ring when I was there, like halfway through my trip, and they said that I needed to carry my meals with me from where I picked them up to my table every night on my head to practice. And after the first 2 days, they let me not have to do that anymore, because I would have starved to death. Other pictures, again, look at these. She's carrying sticks on her head. Because their bike is their primary means of transportation, also not uncommon to see them carrying incredible amounts of things on their bike. Not uncommon to see 3 and 4 people on a single bike either, because again, that's just kind of what they do. These are in downtown Gitega as well. So, the THARS Center is the work that I do. So when we started thinking about wanting to go into Burundi and wanting to do some work there, anytime you're going into a country that's different than your country of origin, it's best if you can have a partnership with someone that's local to teach you the customs, to help make connections for you, to make sure that you're doing things that are appropriate for the group that you're going to be working with. And so we partnered with a group named THARS, and I'm going to show you a picture of the founder of that group in just a second. So I thought I would just run through some pictures of the THARS, they call it the compound, the THARS compound, and what it looks like. So the first picture is taken from the Twa village, which is up on the hill, and then the second picture is the garden that they have at the THARS Center. They try to, because they don't have any money, they tend to grow everything that they can or raise everything that they can to eat. A quick story about the Twas. So my first day in Gitega, they brought a bunch of the kids from the Twa village down just to hang out and to meet me. And so I was teaching some ESL classes, English as a second language classes to them. And so I taught them this song called Hello, My Friend, Hello. And so we did it in English. Their primary language is Kirundi, but their second language is French. So we did the song in French, and then I had them teach it to me in Kirundi. And so as a part of that, hello, my friend, hello, and then you say your name, so Suzanne. And so because for some of them it was the first English they'd ever learned, we did it like a million times. And then the next day I got up, I came out of my room, I was walking from my room to the dining hall area, and all of a sudden I heard this group of kids singing Hello, My Friend, Hello. And it's kind of like the Grinch when he hears the choir coming up from the bottom. And I got chills even now just thinking about it. It's the most extraordinary experience I've ever had. They saw me get up from their village. They wanted to greet me, and they started singing in English, Hello, my friend, hello. It was extraordinary. They've also had experiences where people have tried to break into the THARS Center, and the Twa have seen it, and they've come down and they've taken care of the problem until the police could get there. So this is what is inside the THARS compound. This is the cookhouse and the dorm room. The building to the left is the cookhouse, and I'll show you a close-up of that. This is Ruibe. Ruibe was the cook at the THARS Center. Most houses in Burundi, in many parts of Africa, the kitchen is outside, and it's an open fire. This is their kitchen. There's no stove, microwave. There's no electricity at the THARS Center either. There is running water, but it's only cold water. And so at night we were allowed a bucket of water a day for personal use. So if you wanted a bath, you would take them however much of your bucket you wanted, and they would heat it on the stove, on the fire, and then they would bring it to you in the bathroom to use for your bath. But this is Ruibe at work in the kitchen. Even I went to the house of one of the wealthiest people in Bujumbura, and this is exactly what their kitchen looked like. This is the sleeping rooms. The Gitega is in the malaria zone, so you have to think when you travel to places about taking precautions for things like that. When I actually first got there, Charles's wife had malaria. She's a doctor. So we take medication before we go, and then we use the mosquito nets. And I don't know if you've ever, how many of you have slept someplace where you used a mosquito netting before? It's, getting used to it can be interesting. So there's no electricity. You wake up in the middle of the night, you have to go to the bathroom. The nets drape all the way down to the floor. And so you wake up and you're like, okay, so climbing out of the netting without a light and it's pitch dark, it takes a while to get used to. But eventually you do. But the netting, we actually supplied our own netting. They don't use it. Locals don't use the netting at all. But we did. So this is what they called the dining hall. Malakozi is Kurundi for let's eat, basically. And so every day they would make these really nice meals for us when we stayed there. Another thing that you learn in Burundi, at least, protein is exceptionally limited and considered to be a rare treat. So you might have chicken once a month. You might have fish, maybe once or twice a month. Beef, you might get twice a year. When Charles came to stay at our house with us, we took him to this buffet at a place called Skamania Lodge, and they have you know what a buffet is. They've got 20 different choices. And I was like, you can have whatever you want. And he said, I can choose any one of these. And I go, you could choose all of them if you want. He's like, I could put all of these on my plate and eat as much as I wanted. And I was like, yep, as much as I wanted. And he ate a lot. And after the meal was over, he's like, that's more protein than I've probably had in the last 3 years. So you kind of forget what you take for granted. But protein's expensive. They don't have pets, they don't have dogs or cats, unless they're using dogs for protection, because they're like, why would I pay to feed something that I wasn't then gonna eat? If I'm gonna have an animal, it's gonna be a chicken or a cow, because then I'm gonna eat it. So this is THARS. This is the group that we partnered with. So we opened a 4-H office in Burundi, and we hired staff from THARS, which stands for Trauma Healing and Reconciliation Services. The guy, Charles, that I've been talking about is the one in the yellowish kind of patchwork shirt. The guy on the end closest to me, his name is David, and he's the one that founded THARS. So he founded THARS because he realized that we're going to keep having civil wars if we don't teach our children how to handle conflict in an appropriate manner that's nonviolent. So he wanted to provide an organization that could provide counseling services to kids and to young adults to help them figure out how to deal with their emotions, how to deal with conflict, and to try to deal with some of the PTSD. The World Health Organization did a study in Burundi a couple of years ago, and they determined that about 65% of the population suffered from PTSD. And I'll give you an example of why that is. So David, the founder of THARS, he actually got his Master of Divinity and his Doctor of Divinity in the United States, went back to Burundi, was teaching at a college in a seminary when the war broke out. He had taken his students outside to sit on the lawn because there's no electricity. It was summer, it was hot. So they're sitting on the lawn under the trees. The seminary is surrounded by a wall. His family lived on the other side of the wall. They heard the trucks drive up down the street, and he thought it was curious in the middle of the summer that a series of trucks would be coming down the road, but whatever. And then as they're sitting there doing their lesson, they noticed that troops started piling out of the trucks. And they had machetes and they had guns, and they started killing anyone they saw. So he's watching this mass massacre happen on his campus, and he tells his students to run. Everyone flees. His wife and kids who live on the other side of the wall, his wife jumps up pulls a bench over and looks over and is watching all these students get beheaded. She grabs the kids, she just starts running for the rainforest. David goes into one of the buildings in there, and ironically, this place where he was teaching was the only place in the entire country of Burundi that had a program to teach you how to change oil in cars. If you don't have people driving cars, you don't have much need to teach people how to take care of them, but his program had one. And if you've ever had your oil changed before, a lot of places have the pit, so you pull your car in and they come up underneath your car and they work on it. So he and another colleague jumped into the oil pit, because if you're just walking by from the outside and you see the car, you can't see that there's a place underground to go. So they dove into the pit. They waited there about a little over 24 hours, trying to wait to make sure the coast was clear. He came out of the pit, and pretty much everyone that he knew had been killed. So he spent about 2 days trying to find his family, went through the rainforest to his in-laws' house, and then that's when he was reunited with his family. So it's an amazing story. When I was there, he took us to the school, and he kind of walked us through the day, so we were, literally walking as if we were living the experience. It's extremely powerful. And he said, I have a doctorate of divinity, I'm a trained marriage and family therapist, and I am suffering with what to do with all of this. So imagine these kids who watch this happen, don't know why, just know that their parents are gone and now they're living with other people. So he's like, we need to figure out how to help these kids. And so he started THARS. And so that's the organization that we partnered with. And so that's kind of the history of how they came about, or came into being. 4-H is a really good partnership for this, because does anybody know what the 4-H's are in 4-H? It's okay if you don't. So it's head, heart, hand, and health. And so all things that we're trying to promote with our positive youth development for these kids. So 4-H was a good partnership. Kevin, the Caucasian on the end here, he's a 4-H agent, as was Mary Catherine, who I was working with. So we partnered with them to figure out what we can do. So there was a school garden program that was put together in Rwanda, and so we decided to use their curriculum. And the primary purpose of our project came to be to figure out how to feed these children, so a school feeding program. But we also wanted to be able to provide professional development to the teachers. So this curriculum teaches teachers how to use the garden as a classroom. So you can talk about science and math and history, there's art, there's all kinds of things that you can do with an outdoor laboratory. So our goal was that we would go over for a month, we would spend a month training the THARS staff, and that they would then train the teachers while we were there to watch and see where the issues came about. And then we wanted them to kind of take that information and build community gardens. So that was the plan. And about 6 months before we were supposed to leave to go do this, they had another, they don't call it a war, we'll say a civil outbreak. What happened is the president of Burundi at the time wanted to run for a third office. According to their constitution, you weren't allowed to run for a third office. So he put a bill through to change the constitution to allow you to run for a third office. So the bill did not pass, but he changed the constitution anyway. And then they started holding elections, and so people started, revolting against the government. You can't change the constitution without us. And so what he did then was, okay, we're going to be democratic, we're going to hold elections, and then we'll just see what happens. Well, they started taking people from all over the country at gunpoint to vote. And they would stand over them and watch them vote and make sure that they voted for the current president. So during that time was not a great time to be in Burundi. They were pulling people out of their houses at gunpoint. The government was trying to preach their message of democracy, is what he said, through violence. And there were all kinds of bands forming to try to overthrow the government. So Burundi got put on the do not travel list. When you're a state agency trying to go into a country, they're not going to let you go if your country's under a do not travel list, because that means the embassy's closed, which means they can't promise they can get you out of the country if something happens to you. So now we're stuck. How are we going to make this happen? Well, we decided that we would do Zoom trainings. So Zoom is like, what was it that you would have? It's an online environment, an online classroom environment. And so that meant that we couldn't train anyone in Gitega because there's no electricity. We could only train people in Bujumbura. So all our staff once a month would go. We hired 6 people in Burundi. they would go to Bujumbura once a month. We would do a training with them, and then they would go back to Gitega and train the teachers. And that's kind of the model that we've used ever since then. So most of the Zoom trainings are talking about using school gardens. And then our Burundian staff is meeting together once a quarter with all the teachers that are in the classes that we're using. Talking about positive youth development, understanding the garden committee, those kinds of things. So this is an example of, at the THARS compound, one of the very first professional development that took place. So all of these people in the green shirts are the staff that we've hired. And then everyone else is teachers from the schools that are doing our school garden programs. The first Zoom training was super funny because a lot of these educators had never used a program like that, had never seen themselves on a screen. So here's 6 people crowded around one computer screen, and you would make a statement, and then they would speak, and then you'd hear them say, "I saw you talk on the screen." And then the next person they'd start laughing, and the next person would say something, "I saw you talk on the screen." So he's like, okay, nothing's going to happen this meeting but watching people talk on the screen. So he said, okay, so everyone tell a story that you want to tell, and then let's all watch each other on the screen as they say something. That sounds awesome. And so that's what we did for the first training. And then after that, we got a little more into the curriculum. This is them at the Gitega Center in February doing one of their trainings. And then they started planting gardens. So our pilot program had 5 garden sites, 5 schools that we used. Each school has about 100 students per class. And so we had 2 classes per school that we did. And so this is them planting the gardens. They loved we had to add lime to it because of the soil composition. That was their favorite part, was the liming. So the gardens had probably 10 times as much lime as they need because everyone wanted to turn with the lime. They talked about the seeds, and then they harvested. So our first harvest was in 2016. And different schools did different things with their food. This is them, they had beans. So they mostly grew things like eggplant, corn, tomatoes, squash, green beans, onions. For some schools, 2 of the schools, they did an open house celebration. So they invited everyone in the community. The students prepared the food, and anyone could come in and eat. And so these are at the open house celebrations. The other 2 schools, the students divided the food up, and they got to take it home to their families. And that's what those looked like, the open house celebration. Even though we're in the middle of the rainforest, we discovered that the school calendar doesn't always match the rainy season. And so water catchment systems became the next big thing that we needed. So we've raised funds in 2017 to install water catchment systems in every school. And that came to be a really fun project, because then we could teach things like hygiene, washing your hands, cleaning your food. And so then we had to start sending over money for soap and things like that. And the teachers are like, they want to wash their hands for everything. I just used my textbook. I should go wash my hands. But it's been, a good lesson in hygiene for them. I thought I would just show you really quickly some of the schools and what they looked like. This is Rutagama Primary School. This is about a mile from the Gitega compound. This is a lot of Twa children. This used to be a government building, and it was damaged during the war, and so the government gave it to the school system. So this is this is in the same classroom. So they don't have textbooks, they don't have pencils. Everything that they do is on these chalkboards. Every now and then, when they have standardized testing, remember when you did standardized testing in high school? There's one set of tests that travels through the whole area. And so they send the test booklets and the test, and then they pass it to the next and pass it to the next. So it takes a full year to do testing. Drumming is also huge in their culture. I should have mentioned that earlier. Every school that we went to, they would have a drumming ceremony, and then dancing is also huge. The students always did some kind of dance. And every school has a drumming team and a dance team. This is a wealthy school, and you can tell that because they have uniforms. And that's also, this is also the only school that has a special ed classroom. So last quick story. So this is me up here with these soccer balls. So I took one 4-H soccer ball that I inflated there and one non-destructible soccer ball to all 12 schools when I went. Non-destructible means it cannot be deflated, which means you have to carry them in their regular size. So I had a box that was massive with 12 soccer balls. I complained all the way from Oregon to Africa about how inconvenient. Every time you went through customs, I had to explain the box. Half the time I'd have to open the box to show them what was in there. Then trying to retape it, it was a hassle. It's bulky, I couldn't carry it, I had to carry a little hand truck with me. I complained all the way around the world. I got to this school, this is the third school I went to. So we had a little ceremony every time. Charles would say something in Kirundi, I would say something in French, and then the teacher would say something back in Kirundi and I wouldn't have any idea what was going on. So at this school I did my little spiel in French. My French is not great. I've had many years of French, but even still. And so I'm giving this talk, so happy to have you, thank you, our token of our appreciation, looking forward to our partnership. And the principal starts crying. And I'm like, what did I say? I looked at Charles and I was like, did I not say what I thought I said? And he said, no, you did okay. And then so Charles asked the principal, hey, what's going on? And he said, this is the first sports equipment my school has ever had. 2 soccer balls, their only sports equipment. And so I have never complained again about having to carry anything around the world. And the kids obviously love the soccer balls. They were making their own soccer balls out of paper and rubber bands. So what are we doing in the future? We're trying to help the program become sustainable, so we're in the process of grant writing, putting grants together for them. We added 2 new schools this year, and so our goal is to keep going until we can have all 12 schools that are part of the THARS partnership have gardens on their sites. We are just working on a grant through the Rotary International as well. We've gotten a lot of money from different Rotary clubs. But Rotary International, you can do really large grants, so that's one area where we're looking. And all of the fundraising that we do goes directly to the site, which is why we use, another reason to use 4-H. You don't have to then work through the university system, you can work through the 4-H International. And so we still do our trainings every month. Very excited that the team that I work with is actually all in Burundi right now. They just finished their first week. They are going to be there for 2 more weeks until they come back. Burundi still never got off the do not travel list. So everyone on the team actually paid their own way to go because they wanted to get over there. We're at the 5-year mark. They wanted to get over there and see how things were going. So this is just to show you an example of how far you can stretch your money in Burundi. Our total program for the year is about $30,000. That $30,000 pays for 4 professional development trainings. It pays for 6 staff. It pays for a garden consultant, pays for all the supplies. $30,000 is not a lot to run a program of this size over the course of a year. But that's about where we are now. We send money to them so they buy everything local. We don't send any equipment, we don't send anything to them because we want everything to be local and sustainable. And so I thought I would just close with this quote for you. If you've come to help me, you can go home again. If you've come because you see our struggles as part of your own survival, perhaps we can work together. And this is the philosophy that we have in our program. In the end, we think it might actually be good that we couldn't get over there at the beginning because they've run the program the way that they wanted in a way that's meaningful for them. They spent their whole first 2-day workshop translating everything having to do with 4-H in our program into Kirundi. So putting it in a way that's not a direct translation, but how can we make this our own? How can we make this be something that is important to us? They don't want a handout. They want to be taught how to help themselves, and then they want to be left alone to do their thing in the way that works best for them. And that's the philosophy of our program. So I wanted to leave some time for questions if anybody has any. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking of say you rain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they trying to ritual for this.
They then go to that community center that I showed you a picture of, and would not be uncommon to have I don't know, 400 people in that community center. So I wouldn't say they're sleeping necessarily, but they're all in there together, which is why they wanted some concrete for that, so it wouldn't get washed away. And if they can't get in there, then they just sleep out in the rain. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Since they do have a lot of rain, why was the water rationed at
For us, because they don't have a water catchment system, they didn't have any way to capture the rain when it rained, and we were there in the middle of the dry season, and so all they had was their one storage tank, and that had to get them through 6 weeks. It's a great question.
they don't have wells?
They don't have wells. We actually, as part of our project, we actually sent some guys from an NGO that is digging wells around the world. We've actually sent 2 different teams over there, and they just say that it's just too hard to figure out the logistics of it. They don't have any equipment. So when we ordered, the gardens need rocks. When we ordered the little rocks for our gardens, the next day we were driving by downtown and we noticed there were big rocks like this. They were getting our little pebbles by teams of people who were going from big rock to this rock to this rock, doing all of that by hand. When I was there, we worked on a parking lot for the compound. In the United States, the size that they did, about the size of this room, we could have done in a couple hours. They don't have any equipment, so it was all shoveling by hand to do 3-tiered levels across the, they just can't figure out the logistics of managing the wells, even if they got them in. It's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah.
So after harvest, they did, these 2 villages did a community feast.
Yeah.
And the other took their food home. How long did the food that they took home last them?
Like 2 or 3 days, not very long.
How
So
long before they got warm?
the next growing season, so 2 months, 2.5 months. We can do 3 growing seasons in a school year because it's a rainforest environment, not like here. So I don't know if you noticed see on these sites, we actually have 2 and 3 gardens going at a time that we're rotating. We're doing the crop rotation. So they are kind of getting continuous food during the school year. And a part of the requirement for every school that participates is that they oversee a community garden as well. Because the first year we didn't do that, and the community started trying to take the food from the garden for the school. And so before it was optional, and now it's a requirement. So the older students at the schools go to the communities and help them develop sites. And so now all of these communities also have huge community gardens as well.
So it is spreading.
It's spreading, absolutely. It's one of the most valuable things I've ever done, I have to be honest with you. That's why even though I moved out of Washington State, I remained active in the project because I know I made a difference in the lives of some of these people. There are a lot of things that we do that we never know the impact that we've had. I know the impact that I've had because I see it every month when I get pictures from these schools and see that the lives of these children have changed. The schools that have our gardens in them, we don't have scientific data. We have anecdotal data that their kids are missing school less, their disease rates are decreasing, they're not getting sick as much because they can wash their hands, they've learned how to grow food, and they're eating more food, so their diets are healthier. So we know that it's making a difference, and that's why we keep doing it. Any other questions? Yeah?
A lot of the kids are doing the work, right?
Yeah. All the kids are doing the work. Yeah, that's part of the point. So one lesson at the very beginning of every year is teamwork, how to divide tasks, how to decide who gets to do what on any given day. So we're having them learn those skills by doing work in the gardens. What I don't like to see is a picture full of the teachers out in the gardens because that defeats the purpose. Yeah. Does that make sense? Were you saying that as a good thing or as a bad thing?
Well, it's like, man, like, you know, usually adults are doing the work, like, I guess here in America, but then, like, all the, like, little kids are getting out there, like,
Yeah, that's the whole purpose, is to have them do the work, yeah. And they love it. They will sit there and time their rotations. They don't have watches, so they'll say, you get to 100 to hoe, and then the next team goes. And they'll start counting. So if you walk up to our gardens, it's not uncommon to hear 1, 2, 3, because they're ready for their turn. They want to be involved. Any other questions? Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for your time. Good luck on midterms. Enjoy homecoming activities. and I will see you around campus.